I never imagined that one careless moment of exhaustion would change the course of my life. My name is Lily Collins. I'm 26 years old and I've been working as a hotel cleaner for almost 5 years. Life had been nothing but a cycle of scrubbing, wiping, and serving others while trying to pay off the debts my father left behind when he abandoned us. My mother used to say I was born with stubbornness in my blood, that no matter how broken I was inside, I'd keep moving forward. But lately it felt like that fire was dying one unpaid bill at a time. That night my body gave up on me. I had been working double shifts covering for a friend who always had excuses: sick mother, bad ankle, too much stress. I didn't complain because I knew I needed the hours, I needed the money. But as I walked into the VIP suite's bathroom, I thought it was larger than my entire apartment. The marble floors shone like mirrors, the golden faucets glimmered in the light. And the space was so big that my voice actually echoed when I whispered to myself, "Who needs a bathroom this big?" I tried to laugh at my own joke, but the mop felt like it weighed more than my body. I scrubbed the tub, wiped the mirrors, polished the sink, but with every stroke my eyelids grew heavier. I leaned on my arm for what I swore would be just a moment. 5 seconds, I told myself. Just 5 seconds. But exhaustion betrayed me. My body collapsed onto the toilet lid, and before I knew it, darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke, it wasn't because of peace, it was because of a scream. A deep, furious voice tore through the silence like thunder. My body jolted, I lost my balance, and the bucket of cleaning supplies clattered to the ground as I fell. My heart thudded violently in my chest. Standing there was a man, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with dark hair, piercing eyes, and the kind of presence that made the air feel heavy. His shirt was half unbuttoned, his jaw clenched, and his gaze burned into me with both anger and disbelief. I recognized him instantly. Dylan Scott, the CEO. The man whose name carried power, wealth, and intimidation. "What the hell are you doing in my bathroom?" he demanded, his voice so sharp it almost cut me in half. I panicked. My hands shot into the air like I was being arrested. "I didn't rob you. I swear." The words came out louder than I intended, but they tumbled out before I could stop them. He raised an eyebrow, incredulous. "You fell asleep on my toilet." I wanted to cry, but all I could do was stammer, I was just cleaning. I didn't mean to." I worked morning and night and my body just shut down. I braced myself for the humiliation of being dragged out by security. But instead of yelling further or calling the manager, Dylan just stared at me. His expression shifted from rage to something unreadable, as if he couldn't quite decide if he should throw me out or laugh at me. And then completely unexpectedly, he asked me if I drank coffee. The question caught me so off guard I blinked like an idiot. Yes, but what is that?" He handed me a cup. "Try it." I did. I sniffed it first and immediately recoiled. "This is terrible." His eyebrow arched. "You can tell just by the smell." "Yes," I said before I could stop myself. My voice was trembling, but the truth spilled out anyway. "The beans are over-roasted, it smells burnt, and the sugar can't hide the bitterness. Whoever made this tried to cover up a mistake instead of fixing it." For a moment, silence hung between us. He studied me like I was some puzzle he couldn't figure out. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then, to my absolute shock, Dylan didn't fire me. He smirked just barely and said, "Perfect. You're going to help me fix this problem." I froze, staring at him. "Excuse me, I'm a cleaner, not whatever this is." "Now you're both," he replied coolly. That was the beginning of something I didn't understand. Something that terrified me, and something that would unravel secrets about myself I didn't even know existed. I thought I had reached rock bottom that night, but in reality, it was only the first crack in a wall that had kept me imprisoned for years. A wall I wasn't ready to face yet. He didn't give me time to argue. Dylan snapped his fingers, and moments later, a nervous-looking assistant appeared with a sleek leather notebook and pen. "Write down everything you just said," Dylan ordered him, then turned to me. "Sit." I stared at the velvet chair he gestured to. I'd never sat in anything so luxurious in my life, and the last thing I wanted was to stain it with bleach on my uniform. I can't. I stammered my clothes. "Sit?" He repeated softer this time, almost like a command wrapped in curiosity. So I did. My heart hammered, and I sat stiff as a statue, afraid even to breathe. He leaned on the counter, arms folded, studying me as though I were some strange discovery. "Do you always speak so honestly? even when it could cost you everything. I blinked, my throat dry. I don't know how to lie, I admitted quietly. I've been lied to enough in my life to know I never want to be the one doing it. For a second, something flickered in his eyes, something raw, almost pained, but then it was gone, replaced by that CEO mask again. Over the next week, everything changed. Instead of firing me, Dylan began seeking me out. Every evening when my shift ended, he'd find me and push some cup or plate into my hands, coffee, wine, even soup, and demand my opinion. I always braced for the humiliation, but when I spoke honestly, he didn't sneer. He listened. He wrote things down. And sometimes he smirked, that strange little smirk that made me feel both terrified and alive. The other cleaners whispered about it. They teased me, saying I must have caught his eye because he was lonely or because he liked breaking people. But I knew better. Dylan didn't look at me the way men looked at women they desired. No, he looked at me like I was a mirror he'd never expected to find, one that reflected something he was desperate to see. And I hated that it made my chest flutter. One night I stayed late. The halls were silent, the chandeliers dimmed, and my mop squeaked across the marble floors. Dylan appeared again, his tie loosened, his eyes shadowed. He didn't hand me anything to taste this time. He just stood there staring at the bucket and the rag in my hand. "You shouldn't be doing this," he said suddenly. I frowned. "This is my job." His jaw tightened. "No, I mean this isn't what you were made for. You're sharp, Lily. You see things other people miss. You don't belong on your knees scrubbing floors." My hands froze on this mop handle. No one had ever said something like that to me before. My mother always told me to be grateful for whatever scraps life gave us. My coworkers told me I was too stubborn for my own good. But this man who could crush me with a single word, was telling me I was more. And I didn't know whether to believe him or to laugh in his face. "Maybe this is all I'm good for," I whispered. "Maybe this is all people like me get." Dylan's expression hardened. He stepped closer, his presence suffocating, but oddly protective. "No, that's the lie you've been fed to keep you quiet, and I don't believe in silence." The words made something stir deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope, and hope I'd learned was dangerous. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed sharply. He cursed under his breath, answered, and in seconds his entire demeanor shifted. His voice became cold, commanding, ruthless. I could hear someone on the other end shouting about betrayal, about shareholders, about family legacy. Dylan's jaw clenched so hard I thought it might shatter. When he hung up, he didn't look at me right away. His hands trembled slightly, though his face was stone. "It seems," he said finally, "that betrayal runs deeper in my family than I realized." The air thickened. Betrayal. The word clawed at my chest, awakening old wounds I'd buried long ago. We both stood in that hallway, two broken souls, surrounded by chandeliers and marble, each carrying secrets too heavy to speak aloud. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. I was no longer just a cleaner in his world. I was becoming part of it. The next morning, he didn't summon me to taste anything. Instead, I found a folded note tucked beneath the handle of my cart, like a secret I wasn't sure I wanted. Library. 7 p.m. D. I almost didn't go. I told myself that rich men with wounded voices and immaculate suits were a fire I had no business walking toward. But by 6:58, I was already outside the private library, smoothing the wrinkles of a uniform that would never pass for evening wear. He was there, sleeves rolled tie, abandoned, a hurricane of papers spread across the long walnut table. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a son who had just discovered his childhood house was built on rot. "My stepbrother and my mother," he said without greeting, tapping a stack of printouts. "They've been bleeding my company through shell contracts. It's not just money, it's people. Layoffs. Corners cut where corners shouldn't exist." The word mother snagged on my ribs. Mine had stitched two uniforms together to make one that lasted, then died with her hands still raw. Mothers weren't supposed to hurt the children they made, but I'd learned that love and damage can wear the same face. He pushed a folder toward me. "You see patterns," he said simply. "Tell me what I'm missing." I should have laughed. I should have said, "Dylan, I mop floors." But the pages were already warming under my fingers. Vendor redundancy, duplicate invoices, a consulting firm with 3 names, the same tax ID. My mouth moved before fear caught up. They're hiding movement along the same pipeline. Look, this vendor bills labor, we didn't receive, this one bills materials that don't exist, and this one I tapped a date. Arrives the same day our housekeeping staff gets cut by 11 people. Someone's turning your payroll into their faucet. He stared at me with an intensity that made my pulse stumble. How did you? Because I've watched faucets that never stop, I said, the bitterness surprising even me. Debt collectors at our door, rent going up while the heater dies in winter. Someone always gets to decide what leaks, and it's never us. His mouth softened, then hardened again. Then help me close it. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said nothing while he showed me the emails, the transfers, the property map that placed a shell company's office exactly where an old textile mill once stood, 2 miles from the house where my mother taught me to fold sheets like prayers. My chest burned with a memory I hadn't invited, a notice yellowing on our door. A stamp that read, Scott Capital Recovery. My mother's voice saying, Don't argue, Lily. People like us don't win. I blinked at the letterhead on one of his pages. Scott Group Holdings. The same serif font. The same cold distance between letters. My vision tunneled. Who named your company? I asked, fighting to keep my voice even. He didn't look up. My mother. She likes lineage. Lineage, such a pretty word for chains. He must have seen something change in my face, because he reached across the table not to touch me, but to anchor the moment between us. What did they do to you? I had planned to keep my history tucked like a scab beneath long sleeves. But the room was full of paper that smelled like bleach and lies, and my body remembered the exact sound of a notice being slid under a door. When I was 19, I said a man with that logo on his jacket took our kitchen table while my mother was still eating at it. He said we could buy it back if we paid the fees he'd added for being difficult. We slept on the floor 2 weeks because your lineage decided hunger was a lesson. He went very still. Lily, I didn't. I know I cut in too quickly. You were not the one at our door. But the house that taught him to do that taught you to be this. I gestured to the files. And somewhere under all this paper are the names of people who no longer sleep. Silence opened like a wound. Dylan's jaw tightened as if he were clenching it around a scream. Then carefully, he slid a different folder toward me. Older yellowed, the tab cracked. Hotel personnel terminations. I asked HR for every file your friend, the one you keep covering shifts for, has ever had, he said softly. The head clerk brought the wrong box. His eyes lifted to mine. They brought this. I almost told him I didn't want it, that I didn't need any more proof that the world was built on quiet signed exits. But my name isn't the only one I carry. My hand shook as I opened the file. Pages fluttered like tired wings. And then my breath hit a wall. There in faded ink was my mother's signature, not on a contract, on a complaint. Unsafe chemical storage in sub-basement, repeated respiratory issues among staff, no ventilation. A manager's note scrawled across it, dismiss for insubordination. Beneath that, a second signature in a careful, practiced hand, I recognized from 1,000 branding decks and charity auction invitations. Eleanor Scott, Dylan's mother. I was standing before I knew I'd moved. The chair scraped the Persian rug with a sound that made the back of my teeth ache. She fired my mother, I said, not a question, a verdict. He looked wrecked, but not surprised. She would call it protecting the brand. Heat climbed my throat. She protected your air while my mother coughed herself into the grave. I could hear my voice splinter, but I didn't care. Don't ask me to fix your faucet, Dylan. Your house flooded mine out of the neighborhood. He didn't reach for me. Didn't say I'm sorry like men do when they want you to swallow rage as courtesy. He stared at the signature, as if he could burn it off the page with his eyes alone. You want revenge, he said at last, careful even. Or justice. I want accountability, I said, and felt the words settle like iron. And I want it to have a name. He nodded once, something decisive and dangerous settling into his posture. Then we start with mine. He picked up his phone. The board meets tomorrow at 8. They think they're voting to ratify a restructure my mother designed. Bring the file. Bring your mother's complaint. If they want lineage, we'll give them legacy, the real kind. Fear thundered so loudly, I almost missed the other sound, the small, quiet flutter of an old locked door opening in my chest. I wasn't the girl sleeping on a toilet anymore. I was a woman with a name and a history and a blade made of paper. I closed the folder, slid it under my arm, and met his gaze. If I walk into that room, I said, I won't whisper. Good, he breathed. I'm tired of whispering. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel perched high enough above the city that the streets below looked like veins in marble. I had never been in such a place before, and my hands shook as I clutched the folder to my chest. Men and women in tailored suits filed in their voices, a chorus of practiced politeness and sharpened ambition. At the head of the table sat Eleanor Scott, immaculate in her cream silk blouse, her pearls glowing under the recessed lights. She didn't even glance at me when I entered at Dylan's side. Shall we begin? She said smoothly, tapping her pen against a thick binder labeled Restructure Plan. But Dylan didn't take his seat. He remained standing, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on his mother. Before we discuss your plan, he said evenly, there's something you all need to see. He gestured for me. My knees nearly buckled, but I forced myself forward. The leather folder felt hot in my hands as I laid it on the table. I opened to the yellowed complaint, my mother's handwriting trembling across the page like a voice straining to be heard. 5 years ago, I said, my voice cracking, before steadying, my mother filed this. Unsafe conditions, chemicals stored in unventilated rooms. She begged for protections not just for herself but for everyone working beside her. Instead of being heard, she was dismissed, fired, silenced. I looked up, meeting their startled eyes. 2 years later, she was dead. Her lungs gave out long before her spirit did, and she left me with debts, grief, and a warning I didn't understand until now, that silence is the cruelest weapon the powerful wield. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the HVAC. Then Eleanor laughed, soft, cold, dismissive. How touching, but irrelevant. Personnel decisions are not board matters. We are here to secure this company's future, not relitigate the grievances of a janitor who couldn't follow instructions. My vision blurred with tears, but I refused to let them fall. She wasn't a grievance. She was a human being. Dylan's voice cut through like a blade. And she was silenced by your hand, Mother. The same hand that has been siphoning money through shell companies and bleeding this company dry while you claim to protect it. Gasps rippled through the room. Eleanor's composure faltered only for a flicker, but it was enough. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing at her son. You dare accuse me in front of the board? I don't accuse, Dylan said. He held up a stack of printouts, the very invoices and payments I had pointed out days earlier. I prove. Here are the contracts, here is the redundancy, and here is the trail that leads directly back to your shell entities. Murmurs erupted among the directors. Some leaned forward, eyes sharp with curiosity. Others looked nervous, calculating. Eleanor's lips curved into a smile that chilled me. And you expect them to believe? What, that you, Dylan? The boy who was handed everything suddenly discovered a conscience. No, he said. His voice softened, but it filled the room like thunder. I expect them to believe her. Dozens of eyes turned to me again, and for a moment I wanted to vanish into the polished floor. But then I remembered my mother's voice, hoarse from coughing, yet still strong enough to tell me, never let them take your truth. So I spoke. I told them about the night we lost our kitchen table, about the years of debts and hunger, about watching my mother work herself raw until her lungs betrayed her. I told them about my own exhaustion, about falling asleep on a toilet because I'd taken on too many shifts to pay bills she'd left behind. And I told them how Dylan found me there, not as a CEO above me, but as a man forced to see the rot in the foundation of his own empire. When I finished, the silence was heavy and holy. The board members avoided Eleanor's gaze. She, for the first time, looked unsettled. The chairman cleared his throat. A vote, then, on whether the proposed restructure continues, or whether an internal investigation is launched into these allegations. The tally was swift, brutal. By a wide margin, they voted for the investigation. Eleanor's face drained of color. Her pearls suddenly looked like shackles. She rose, her composure cracking. You foolish children. You've handed the company to scavengers and liars. Her eyes cut into me like knives. And you, cleaner girl, do you think this makes you his equal? You will regret standing here. I felt Dylan's hand brush mine under the table, steadying, grounding. And for the first time, I didn't feel like prey. No, I said, quietly but firmly. The only thing I regret is that it took me this long to stop whispering. Eleanor's heels struck the floor like gunfire as she stormed out, leaving the boardroom buzzing with whispers. I stood frozen, clutching the empty folder against my chest, as if it could shield me from the stares. My heart pounded so hard, I thought the directors must hear it echoing off the glass walls. Dylan leaned closer, his voice low but steady. "It's over for now, but she won't stay quiet. She never does." He was right. A woman like Eleanor Scott didn't accept defeat. She sharpened it into a weapon. And I knew deep down that her threats weren't just for show. She would come after me, after my mother's memory, after anyone who dared to expose her empire of silence. That night, back in my cramped apartment, I lay awake listening to the hum of the fridge and the distant honking of cars. My hands still smelled faintly of bleach, even after scrubbing them raw. I thought about my mother, how she'd worked herself sick in that hotel, how her complaint had been buried under signatures and lies. She never got to sit in a boardroom. She never got to speak her truth, but I had. And yet, I wasn't free. The next morning, headlines blared with venom. "Hotel cleaner manipulates CEO heir," one read. "Gold digger or truth teller," another sneered. My picture, grainy and cruelly lit, was plastered across gossip sites, my name dragged through mud. They twisted my testimony into a love affair scandal, painting me as the woman who clawed her way up from toilets to boardrooms by seducing a lonely millionaire. I felt sick. Betrayal wasn't new to me, but this time it wasn't just mine to bear. It was my mother's, rewritten and mocked. When Dylan appeared at my door, dark circles under his eyes, I almost didn't let him in. But his voice cracked when he said, "Please," and I stepped aside. He sat heavily on the couch, scrubbing his hands over his face. "She's behind this, my mother. She's spinning the narrative before the investigation can pin her down." I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to still the trembling. "She said I'd regret it. Maybe she's right." His head snapped up. "No, don't you dare believe her. She's built an empire on fear, and every lie she spreads now is proof she's running scared." His eyes softened, searching mine. "But I know it's costing you everything." I wanted to scream at him that he didn't know what it meant to have neighbors whispering, to walk past the hotel staff and feel their pity like knives, to watch your mother die and know her truth had been stolen. But then I saw it, the cracks in his own armor. For all his wealth and power, Dylan was drowning too, caught between the woman who raised him and the truth that could set him free. "Then fight with me," I whispered, surprising myself. "Not just in boardrooms, in the world she controls with her lies. If you want to prove you're not her son in every way, then stand beside me when the world tries to bury us." He nodded, his jaw set with a determination I hadn't seen before. "Then we burn her mask off in public. Together." And that was how I found myself a week later, standing in front of flashing cameras, microphones shoved toward my face. My palms sweated, my throat closed, but Dylan's hand brushed mine, anchoring me in the chaos. The reporters shouted questions, hungry for scandal, but I raised my voice above them all. "My mother was a cleaner here. She died because her warnings were silenced. I am here to make sure her story is not erased." The words echoed, carried farther than I ever expected. And in that moment I realized Eleanor Scott's greatest weapon, fear, no longer owned me. But freedom comes at a cost, and I hadn't yet reckoned with the deepest betrayal waiting to surface in the shadows of Dylan's family. The cost came sooner than I imagined. A week after the press conference, an unmarked envelope slid under my door. Inside was a photocopy of another document, brittle with age. At first I thought it was another of my mother's complaints. But when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't my mother's handwriting, it was my father's. His name scrawled across a non-disclosure agreement, with the Scott family crest at the top. A payout, large enough to drown a family in silence. My chest went hollow. My father hadn't just abandoned us out of weakness, he had sold us. He had taken hush money to walk away, leaving my mother to fight alone, leaving me to carry the wreckage. When Dylan came by that evening, I threw the paper onto his chest. My voice cracked with fury. "Did you know about this?" He glanced down, eyes widening. "Lily, I swear to you I didn't." "Your family bought my father's silence," I spat, pacing the tiny room. "Do you understand what that means? She didn't just fire my mother, she paid him to disappear, to leave us without even his shadow. She destroyed my family twice." Dylan's face twisted with rage, but not at me. "This is her handwriting," he said, stabbing a finger at the signature. "Eleanor's. She always thought money solved everything, even loyalty. But his words barely registered. My knees gave out and I collapsed onto the couch, clutching my head. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had known. It wasn't just about my mother anymore. It was my father. My own blood had traded me away like I was nothing. I've spent my whole life thinking I wasn't enough, I whispered. Not enough to keep him. Not enough to keep her alive. And now I know he chose money over me. Dylan sat beside me, his hand trembling near mine, but he didn't touch me yet. His voice was hoarse. Then let's take everything she used to buy silence and turn it into a megaphone. If your father sold you out, then we make his deal meaningless. We tell the truth louder than she can bury it. His conviction shook me. He was offering me war, not comfort. And for the first time, I wanted war. The next board meeting was chaos. Eleanor's allies scrambled, her voice rising above the din as she denied everything, twisted truths into daggers. This girl is manipulating you, she hissed. She has poisoned my son against me, against his own blood. I stood then, clutching the NDA. My voice wavered but didn't break. If exposing the truth is poison, then maybe the Scott family should ask why lies taste so sweet to them. I held the paper high. This is proof that Eleanor Scott paid to silence my family. She took away a wife, a mother, and a childhood. And if you keep her at the helm, then you are all complicit. The directors shifted uneasily. Whispers buzzed. Eleanor's mask cracked, fury blazing across her face. And then Dylan stood, his voice like thunder. If you won't remove her, then I resign. And I will take everything I know to the press, to the courts, to anyone who will listen. Gasps filled the room. Eleanor's composure shattered into desperation. You would betray me for her, no, Dylan said. His hand finally found mine, steady and sure. I betray you for the truth. The gavel fell. The board voted. Eleanor was suspended pending investigation. But as we walked out hand in hand, I knew this wasn't the end. Power like hers didn't crumble quietly. It dragged others down with it. And the question that gnawed at me was simple. When the dust settled, would I lose Dylan too? The weeks that followed were a blur of headlines, subpoenas, and restless nights. Eleanor Scott's empire trembled, her allies scattering as investigators swarmed her accounts. Yet even as the walls closed in around her, she remained venomous. Paparazzi caught her sneering outside her townhouse, spitting words that still echo in my ears. She's just a maid. My son will crawl back when he tires of scrubbing toilets with her. Every time I read those words, something inside me twisted, because beneath my anger lived a quieter fear. What if she was right? What if Dylan, raised on silken marble, accustomed to a world where every whim was catered, one day looked at me and saw nothing but the girl who once fell asleep on a toilet? One night I voiced it. We were in his penthouse, a place that still felt more like a museum than a home. I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like broken stars. What happens when this is over? I whispered. When your mother is gone and the company is yours again. Do you wake up and realize I don't belong in your world? Dylan turned to me, his face weary but unflinching. Lily, he said, stepping closer. I don't want someone who belongs in my world. I want someone who challenges it. Someone who forces me to see it for what it is. That's you. His words cracked something open in me, years of shame, of feeling small, of being invisible. I wanted to believe him, and maybe for the first time I did. But belief didn't erase scars. A letter arrived days later in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My father's. Short, clumsy, almost pleading. I was young, desperate. I thought the money would save us. I was wrong. Forgive me. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the paper trembling in my hands. Rage, grief, pity. They all swirled until I didn't know which one to breathe. He was alive. He had stayed silent while my mother died, while I worked myself to the bone, while I carried the weight of abandonment like a brand on my skin. And now he wanted forgiveness written in ink. Dylan found me there, curled up with the letter. He didn't tell me what to feel. He just knelt and said, "You don't owe him absolution, not now, maybe not ever. The choice is yours." That night I realized revenge and justice aren't the same. Revenge burns hot and fast, but justice endures. My mother deserved more than ashes. She deserved a legacy. So I told the investigators everything. About the chemicals, about the hush money, about the signatures that tied it all to Eleanor Scott. I stood in court and read my mother's words aloud, my voice shaking but unbroken. And when the verdict came, fraud, misconduct, corporate abuse, I felt a weight lift that wasn't mine alone. It was hers, too. Eleanor was led away, her pearls stripped, her mask shattered. The press swarmed, but I didn't care. I wasn't there for their cameras. I was there for my mother, for the truth. Afterward, Dylan and I walked out together. For the first time, the city air felt clean. He squeezed my hand, and I knew whatever storms lay ahead, I wasn't alone anymore. I am not just the girl who once scrubbed toilets until her hands bled. I am the daughter of a woman who refused to be silenced. And I am a woman who chose to turn pain into power, betrayal into voice, grief into a weapon of truth. If you've ever been told that your story doesn't matter, let mine remind you silence is what they feed on. Speak. Even if your voice shakes, especially then. And if this story touched you, if you saw a piece of your own struggle in mine, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your voice matters too.